Okay, it's Phil Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat, and today is Friday, the 18th of March, 2022. Click on the subscribe button here in the lower right to subscribe to fewer episodes, and also the notification bell in the far upper right to be notified when those episodes are released. Today's topic is let's honor Thomas Jefferson. Critical race theory and identity politics advocates have gained enough influence to cause many Americans to despise some of our country's most significant founders. Chief among such founders has been Thomas Jefferson. New York City, for example, removed a 200-year-old statue of Jefferson from its city hall last year. When race hustlers can persuade us to despise Jefferson, they're well on their way to transforming America into a country that hates our traditional values. Unlike other countries, America was not founded because of her people had a common race. This nation was founded on ideals that united us. It was organized as a constitutional republic with no ruling family, thereby proclaiming the political equality of all her citizens, whom she invested with the freedom to pursue their own interests with minimal government interference. Present attacks on founders focus on what they did not do as opposed to what they did accomplish. Although they didn't abolish slavery, they did indeed organize the freest country in history. When founded, America had but 3 million people, the current population of the state of Iowa. At the time, the 13 colonies were little more than a remote backwater on the world stage, but they blossomed into one of the most powerful nations on earth within a century and a quarter. The contrast between Jefferson's denunciations of slavery and his failure to put them into practice make him an easy target. Yet the first gift that Jefferson gave to America was her independence. His language of the self-evident truths left a lasting mark. His Declaration of Independence asserted that certain rights linked to those truths should be universal, not merely applicable in the 13 colonies. If Jefferson falls victim to cancel culture, there may be no stopping a George Washington takedown as well. Although his participation in slavery is the obvious flaw in his reputation of a founder who wrote, quote, "all men are created equal," close quote, many Americans today believe that slavery was unique to the southern states. In truth, slavery was legal in all 13 colonies in 1776. In 1890, Lincoln's two private secretaries wrote in a 10-volume biography. This is a 10-volume biography by Lincoln secretaries of the former president. And here's what they quoted. Lincoln believed that the people of the North were as responsible for slavery as the people of the South, close quote. Less than 3 months before the Civil War ended, Lincoln told his Secretary of State, Seward, quote, "If it was wrong for the South to hold slaves, it was wrong for the North to carry on the slave trade and sell them to the South," close quote. Moreover, during the 400 years of transatlantic slave trade, only about 4% arrived in America. Nearly all of the others went to Brazil and the Caribbean. Even though the Declaration's "all men are created equal" phrase was an obvious contradiction from the beginning, Martin Luther King took the correct perspective. He realized that slavery could not have been abruptly ended in 1776 without aborting the birth of our country. Thus, he interpreted Thomas Jefferson's declaration as a promissory note to be redeemed at the right time. The Declaration ultimately made it impossible for slavery to continue indefinitely. When the 13th Amendment ending slavery was ratified in December 1865, the pre-carpetbagger, all white legislatures of 8 of the 11 former Confederate states voted in favor of it. A 9th, Florida, followed by the end of that same month. Historian Jared Stepman writes, quote, "It is easy to condemn Jefferson and the founders for not doing enough to extinguish a social system now universally reviled, when we don't have to deal with the complex consequences of abolition. Slavery was woven into the culture and economic fabric of American society, and it could not be so easily removed, even by those who deeply hated it. Given this reality, it is perhaps less remarkable that the founders failed to immediately rid themselves of slavery, and more remarkable that their efforts put it on an inevitable path to extinction, close quote. When today's Americans condemn Jefferson for failing to free his slaves, few realize the obstacles that confronted manumission in his era. Many Southern states had laws that did not permit slaves to be set free unless their former masters left them in an economic condition in which they were unlikely to become destitute and therefore a burden on the state. Consistent with the nature of farming, many plantations were also heavily in debt. As in the North, when debts went into default, creditors were permitted to seize assets and sell them to pay off their debts. And the Brown brothers of Rhode Island did seize Southern slaves and sell them to pay off the debts that they had loaned to the plantation owners. The Brown brothers of Rhode Island were the Brown University is named for them, and Brown Brothers Harriman, a major Wall Street firm, also. Now, in the South, slaves were among such assets. To prevent a plantation owner from stripping his estate of slaves, Virginia passed a law in 1792 that gave creditors the power to seize even some freed slaves to satisfy debts. Often those creditors were ultimately Northern banks, like Brown Brothers Harriman. Well, like the Brown Brothers. It wasn't known as Brown Brothers Harriman at that time, but it was the Brown Brothers Financial Operations. Without such a law, owners might have been more tempted to free their slaves in their wills. Get that? The plantation owners, like Washington, when he died, he freed his slaves in his will. More of that would have happened if the owners knew that nobody would come and seize their slaves and sell them to pay off the debts of the plantation. When he was 45 years old, 6 years before being elected president, Abraham Lincoln said, quote, "When the Southern people tell us they are no more responsible for the origin of slavery than we, I acknowledge the fact. When it is said that the institution exists and that it is very difficult to get rid of it in any satisfactory way, I can understand and appreciate the same. I surely will not blame them for not doing what I should not know how to do myself," close quote. In recent decades, Jefferson has been increasingly accused of fathering at least one child by a slave named Sally Hemings. Until recently, most historians dismissed the arguments as stemming from the revengeful allegations of a disgruntled former Jefferson political supporter and journalist named James Callender. In 1998, DNA testing showed that at least one of Sally's children, named Eston, shared a genetic heritage with the Jefferson family. Yet the father remains unknown because there are over 24 potential candidates for that paternity. Nevertheless, as cancel culture gained momentum, the administrators at the Jefferson Monticello Memorial tried to end the debate in 2018 by arbitrarily declaring Eston to be undeniably Thomas Jefferson's child. In truth, it is far from a settled fact. Next, social justice historians added 2 + 2 and got 22 instead of 4 by claiming that Sally was raped. No evidence of that. They just took 2 and 2 and got 22. Yet, when Thomas Jefferson served as ambassador to France, he took Hemings and a male slave to Paris with him. Even though slavery was illegal in France, Hemings never petitioned for her freedom, which might be expected if Thomas had raped her. We can never know what truly happened, if anything, between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, but that doesn't stop the allegation of a relationship being used as a handy club by Jefferson detractors. The current focus on historical slavery has left one of Jefferson's most significant contributions almost unnoticed. Specifically, as a proponent of an agrarian economy, he left a legacy of property ownership. When he became president in 1800, America had more property owners than did all of Europe, even though the old world countries had 30 times the American population. The statistic was a harbinger of the great property holding middle class that would make America an economic powerhouse, even though predominantly agrarian. If you own your own home or aspire to, you can thank Jefferson for that, in a way, because he fostered that culture. During his presidency, he enlarged the opportunities for property ownership by acquiring the Louisiana Territory. Her frontier would become destinations for land-hungry European immigrants for more than a century. If not purchased by Jefferson, states in that region of the Louisiana Purchase would have become the properties of the French or Spanish monarchs. It is therefore ironic that present Louisiana Democrats have minimized the state's connection to Jefferson. Without him, the state would have become part of a European empire, perhaps before perhaps transitioning into an impoverished nation like Mexico. In fact, without the Southern presidents of Thomas Jefferson and James K. Polk, America's present western border would be the Mississippi River, not the Pacific Ocean. Now, what I just talked about here is an excerpt, essentially an excerpt from The Dreadful Frauds, Critical Race Theory and Identity Politics. You can get the book at Amazon. If you want an autograph copy, it's $20. Without that, it's $16, and Amazon Kindle is $6. But if you want an autograph copy, you got to email me, Phil, PHIL_Lee, LEIGH, at me.com. Okay, thanks for watching, and that's our show for today. I'll get you next time.